Hey everybody, Edo here, and I am excited today because I have Keith Matejka on the line. Say hello, Keith.
Hey, good to see you.
Yes, good to see you. And actually, I got to see you in person because you and I both attended PAX Unplugged 2022
Right,
in Philadelphia at
last week.
yeah, Philadelphia Convention Center. Is that what that thing's called? I don't
Let's
remember.
go
I
with
don't
that.
know.
Yeah.
Um, and so I thought it would be cool to have a quick chat, a recap, sort of perspective on the show. I mean, we were both there. We had some similar and different, perspectives, and I just think for creators and indie publishers and whatever folks, it's good to get a perspective of what it is to be at the show and whether or not it was worth it, that kind of thing.
Sure.
So
So
like for
was
go
this the
ahead.
first year that you had been before? No.
This is the first year that I attended PAX Unplugged. We've done other shows as well as PAX South or
Oh,
whatever it is. Table PAX. We were in the tabletop showcase of PAX South,
right, which
um,
no longer exists,
which
by
no
the way.
longer
Yeah.
exists. But no, this was the first time. Not the first time I've been in that convention center, but the first time as part of PAX Unplugged. So. Um, And so we were in a 10 by 20. No, we were in a 10 by 10. You guys did a 10 by 20. So that's
Correct.
like
Yeah.
in terms of show scale, 10 by 10 is the smallest thing you can get. 10 by 20 is not the huge, but getting sizable, more
Right.
central, and then you can get these big gigantic booths. I
And
was
usually
go ahead.
people jump up to a 20 by 20 after that. And obviously, as an exhibitor, you're paying for each one of those 10 by 10s. So jumping from the 10 by 20 to a 20 by 20 is not a small cost. And then some people will just go crazy with massive booths that, you
Yeah,
know.
and I think the cost side of it is going to be an interesting part of this conversation because, I mean, we can talk about the different factors, but it's certainly not just the booth that you're paying for when you do one of these shows. But you were sort of, you were in the high volume area, but sort of down, if you think of it as the center, you were where it was, but you're like all the way off to the side. Pencil First Games was like far back, third row from the end in the on the side. So you were in a much busier area, but sort of off center, and I was sort of in the boonies. Probably because you had the bigger booth. You've also was How many years have you done PAX Unplugged?
I think this is our fourth year that we've been exhibiting. So, like all these big conventions, the more consecutive years that you're there, they kind of give you preferential treatment in terms of where your booth is.
Right.
Some conventions like Gen Con have like a point system where you earn points, and when you hit certain thresholds above other people, I don't know of anything like that for PAX, but it definitely has that feel of like, oh, you're like a returning exhibitor, you get a little bit more preferential treatment than the first time guys.
But I will say I think that's in regards to where you are. My overall experience at the two PAX run shows that I've been to is the actual treatment of you as an exhibitor is just universally fantastic from my experience. They have there's these enforcers who are essentially their staff who are very proactive in helping you. There's lots of, they let you manage the booth how you want to manage the booth. They let you drive your stuff onto the floor. Like, it's very exhibitor friendly and responsive, really compared to a lot of other conventions that I've certainly shown at. Would you say that was your experience as well?
Yeah, that's true for sure. There's things. The thing about PAX is that like there's nothing kind of included in terms of furniture, whereas at other conventions there are. But in terms of how the booth is run, having that enforcer that's kind of dedicated to you and maybe three other booths that kind of just wanders around and is available for questions, or you can kind of send them to do things for you or whatever. Like having a contact person from the convention kind of within earshot through during the hours is like super helpful. No other convention that I go to has that. And there's been a lot of times when we really need help finding some information, or we're not sure of how something's gonna work. I can just talk to the guy that's right there, that's like dedicated to me and to three other people, and they're gonna find the answer for me, and that's awesome. There's things that PAX does where like once the show floor is over, like they do this kind of all the enforcers kind of go across the show floor, kind of kicking out the folks that like aren't really supposed to be there anymore, so that as somebody running a booth, it's nice to like when the show is over for the day, like I can feel confident about like packing up and getting my people out of the convention hall. Whereas then sometimes at conventions, like somebody might walk up like 20 minutes after the show is officially closed, and they're like asking you questions, or they're trying to buy something, which you want to accommodate those people, but like it's nice that there's like a definitive endpoint and there's somebody in charge of enforcing that happening.
Yeah.
It's really nice, So
Yeah,
I would
sure.
say PAX is the best run. Well, sorry, PAX is the most well-run convention that I go to, and that's one of the reasons why I enjoy going back every year. So it's got some unique features compared to other conventions.
Yeah, for sure. I didn't pull the attendance, but it seemed pretty, and it's weird post COVID, whatever, like what is good attendance or bad attendance, but certainly a lot of folks, more folks in your area than in our area, but pretty, it felt like a well attended show for sure. Well, my understanding from folks was like way more exhibitors this year
Oh,
compared to the last few years.
that's probably true. Um, I thought I saw that there were signs that are like Friday badges are still available, which lead me to believe that like maybe Saturday and Sunday have been sold out. That's one of the other things I actually like about PAX is that it's only 3 days
Right.
long. A lot of other conventions are kind of Thursday through Sunday, and by having that fourth day, I'm not sure how much like value you add. And going to a convention, organizing everything, getting there, getting home, it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, and a fair amount of money as well. So it's nice that it's more concentrated compared to some of the other conventions as well.
Well, let's talk about that for a quick second because I think it's relevant for folks, at conventions, right? So, in preparation for a convention, you can go to the PAX Unplugged page or whatever. You can get on a list to find out when booths are available and sign up for booths. I'm pretty sure the 10 by 10 was $1,000. And then, we ended up, we had to pay to have electricity and some tables. I think we paid an extra 250 bucks. So you're going to sign up for your space. And then really there's a lot of logistics involved. One of which is, getting your product to Philadelphia. In our case, we had actually shipped a lot of product to Jessica, who lives in New York, and she drove it down from New York to the show. So we didn't ship directly to the show, but though that's an option, a lot of people do. And if I'm not mistaken, you drove from Wisconsin, right?
Yeah, so most people will ship their stuff to kind of the PAX warehouse, and then before the show, they organize everything going to your booth, and you show up and it's there. Um, Obviously, there's some fees associated with that in terms of moving it there, and then the storage fees, and then figuring out, getting it back to wherever you need it to be after the show, which is the part that some people forget about. But Thunderworks traditionally will just throw all our stuff in a van and then drive there. I still have this kind of scrappy, small
Sure.
company attitude, and so it's like I do it myself. I want to
Well,
save 500
but
bucks.
there's a lot of time costs associated with that, so it's a major consideration. Along those lines, having driving it in a vehicle in a van gives you a lot of flexibility because the other thing that is going to be a major consideration is how much product to bring, right?
Right.
And if you have it in a vehicle that you can take as much as you need and bring stuff back really easily, is a little different if you have to make a calculated ship out and then ship back. I know for us, we sort of pulled a lot of different publishers, but sort of used Thunderworks games as sort of like a top end, and I don't want to say that sounds worse, but then also looked at Steve Finn and Dr. Finn's games, not like as a bottom end, but as something more, relative to our pencil first game size, right? And so that was sort of how we said, okay, what would be a really great outcome, what would be a minimum, and sort of figuring that out.
Right. It's this balance between like, you don't want to sell out of all your stuff the first day, it's like missed sales opportunities, but you don't want to bring half of the stuff you bring there and bring it back, So trying to figure out how much stuff to bring is like it's not easy. And so what we look at historical data, obviously the first couple of years we just took a shot at it or whatever. And then we take a look at what we sold the previous conventions, like usually the previous convention would be Gen Con, see what we sold Gen Con to see how well our new titles are moving, and see what we sold at the previous PAX Unplugged, and make a call. If we're going to continue to run these panel vans, then we've got a limited number of space. But I don't want to stuff it with a bunch of stuff I'm going to end up bringing back, which is happened quite a bit this year. But yeah, it's a tough thing. But at the end of the day, I still think like selling out of something at a convention actually has some positive optics. It's like, oh, that sold out. That game is
Oh,
really
I
hot.
mean, it was. I mean, interesting. Not that this is a fair comparison, but I had brought our last six copies of Herbaceous Sprouts and like our last six copies of Liftoff, Get Me Off the expanded deluxe edition. But Herbaceous Sprouts like basically sold out on Friday, which was like, there was only six, so this is not an impressive thing. But it was like a lot of people were like, hey, would you have that? And it's like, oh, sorry, we sold out.
Right. I mean, we did something very similar. Where, like I had like 4 red playmats for cartographers left over. So like before I left for the show, I turned them off on our website and just brought them, and they sold out within like the first 2 hours. And then you get to cross it off on your price list, and people ask about it, and you're like, sorry, it's really popular, sold out. Yeah, it was 4 units of the thing.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
it is kind of has some psychological effect on potential buyers, I guess.
Right. And so what you need to calculate the how much product you're going to bring. You can triangulate. You can look at historic data. One of the things I emphasize a lot is like understanding exactly what your potential gross is. Right. Like you can sit down and be like, well, if this is the product we bring and here's our price points, and you're going to talk about your pricings and your deals, whatever. The most this amount will earn is X. Like it's not a video game with apps installs and people. It's like, no, if we sold every single one of the things we brought, we'd make this. And you could look at it and be like, well, would that be a good outcome for us? Like, would that pay for itself? Or we're like, that's nowhere near enough money. So thinking about like the potential growth space or profit space, I think is important.
Yeah, there's a philosophical question there too. That's kind of more overarching, of like, how do you as a publisher view the role of conventions in your business, right?
Right.
So is going to a convention like a lot of companies treat it as like a marketing effort. It's like getting the word out about the game, building some hype about like new releases, getting an opportunity to talk one-on-one with customers, and like walking away in the black and made a little bit of money is not always the primary objective.
Yeah, 100%. I really do think you need to think about it that way, because you're figuring out your product, what you're going to bring, how you're going to get it there. That's all costs. You're going to pay for the booth. Then there's the people, who's coming, paying for their time, paying for their housing, paying for their food. By the way, the food cost directly next to the convention hall is like apparently dirt cheap in Philadelphia compared to California. It's the cheapest food. It felt like I was eating food in the 80s. I was like, breakfast is $4. What's going on? But I guess it depends on where you were going. But nothing was crazy. It wasn't like you're there and you're like, oh, they're gouging on prices. I mean, inside the convention, it wasn't like go to 7-Eleven, buy 6 waters, and bring them in with you type of thing. But generally speaking,
I mean, that's another like tactic that you can use for booth furniture as well. There's these companies that provide furniture for your booth that you can sign up for ahead of time. That's part of kind of the working out the logistics. But those pieces of furniture, like chairs and tables and whatever, those things cost a lot of money. And so one of like the tips and tricks for like the scrappy young guys that happens a lot is, they'll come into town and then they'll run to Target and they'll buy a couple of folding chairs or whatever they need, and then they just leave them behind. And at the end of the day, they saved a lot of money because renting them from the furniture logistics place is like crazy expensive.
That 100%, right? The more you can but the counter to that is like, well, that might mean you want to be there a day earlier, and then what's that going to mean, right? Like, so
right.
There's some interesting aspects to that.
Like, what happens if you go there and they don't have the thing that you need, or they're sold out of it, or whatever, and then you gotta, you got to pull something together. My first PAX Unplugged, I flew there. I didn't drive, and I didn't do that ever again. But we didn't have any tables, and I didn't want to spend money for more tables, so I took the empty cases that the games were in, and I taped them together and put a tablecloth over them so they looked like a table. And then after the show, you just take the tablecloth off and put whatever's left over back in the boxes, and away you go.
Oh, it's
Right?
like you can figure any way you want that
Yeah,
way. It's a good idea.
super modular, yeah, modular.
But yeah. Okay, so for going to the convention, just to for so pencil first games, 10 by 10, two people, two hotel rooms, a U-Haul rental from New York to the show and back. That was our footprint. And I flew out. Jessica obviously drove. She ended up having an extra day in front and an extra day behind, and I had like 3 days. You had a bigger crew. What was your layout?
Right. So it was so we had a 10 by 20 booth, and then we rented a demo table dedicated for Thunderworks stuff that was kind of in the free play area, and we came, just me and Tim Vernon drove the van from Wisconsin, and then we recruited local help. So instead of bringing kind of our own people, which we usually do, we basically did a shout out. Said we're looking for people in the Philadelphia area that want to help out. And so, we provided their badge, and we provided, it's either a standard rate per hour for their help, or, game composition in terms of product to take home. And so we had two people running the demo table. That was kind of the length of the convention day, which was 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. all 3 days. And then we like to have at least three people in the booth, one person kind of checking people out, and in terms of like taking their money and running the register, and then two additional people kind of explaining games. Like we had one table with Kate May set up, and we had a gentleman that was kind of explaining that to people as people walked by, and then we had two kind of taller, what are called pub tables, where cartographers and Tenpenny Parks were both set up, and there was somebody there to kind of ask, "Oh, have you heard of cartographers? Can I tell you about it?" Like that kind of sales pitchy stuff. So in general, we had 5 people working at all times, but everybody needs lunch breaks, so then you kind of have to throw in a sixth person. And because we kind of got volunteers for different days, not everybody wants to work all 3 days, all day long. So some people end up doing half days, so then we got to bring on some more people to kind of create those schedules. But in terms of man hours, we're going to have 8 hours a day for at least 5 people, more like 6. Times 3 days. That's not a small bill to pay. Sure. Obviously, I don't pay myself, but
but that's relevant, right? I don't pay myself either. The interesting bit though is like, so for us, so we had a different setup. We had just a show and tell setup. We weren't doing demos. We didn't have the bandwidth. We really had like a U of all of like a corner of an L shape, I guess, of all of our titles. So we really had like probably 6 or 8 titles on display, maybe 7. I'd have to like go back, but like it was probably too much. I think we just did the smorgasbord, like check out everything. Some of it ended up working out for us because we have our nature line and our adventure line, but like I think in the future we'd cut it down. But certainly we just had it all out, and it was Jessica and I, and basically there were some down periods here and there, but it was pretty nonstop, and it doesn't take a lot of people to be like explaining to 2 people and have a line forming, that kind of thing. I could not imagine doing that solo for the 3 days. It would, whether for bathroom and for lunch, but just also like the drain of it. But for the two of us, it was basically, I'd take a 15, she'd take a 15. I don't think I took lunch, but she took a lunch, and it was just, it's a lot. But like that's probably the smallest. So there certainly were. I mean, Pencil First Games has a lot of games. We've been around for a while, so like we're not super indie. There were some indie tables that like we're not too busy, but I still think in a 10 by 10, if you tried to solo it, it'd just be really rough. I think your base is at least 2 people, or at least you and somebody who can come in and like cover the booth for you for an hour type of thing.
Right. Yeah. Definitely. I mean, I've seen so many people do one person for a 10 by 10 booth and run it all weekend long. It's like, that's got to be exhausting. I mean, running demos and kind of answering people's questions and kind of being on that whole time, kind of trying to be, friendly and entertaining and informative and reading people in terms of how much the information they want and trying to serve that up to them. Like, it's kind of exhausting, to be honest. And you're
Kinda.
talking all
It's
day
super
long too.
exhausting.
So it's
Super
like,
exhausting. And you have to talk loud. This was a masked event, so you're in masks. I was actually thinking like, hey, I want to get one of those little mic things that like project, with the speaker on the table. But like, no, it's super. I hadn't been on my feet that long, that consistently in a long time. I actually, they're like little things. I was like, what I really wanted, like next time I do this, I want to get one of those like high stool chairs, so like you can sit back and not look like you're seated, but like still get a little bit of the weight off your feet. Because like when you're sitting and you're like lower than the table, people look like you're like not engaged and don't
right.
care. But like I
Right.
wouldn't have mind just a little bit. I could just sit back a little bit. But I think there's a lot in there. So okay, so we did the event, and I think a natural question is like that. You were talking about that marketing, but like, how did we do? What's your assessments of performance? There's the like profit loss, but then also like the marketing side. Like, was it a good show, mediocre? How do you think of it?
Right. So, like, what makes the show good, right? Some of it is like, well, did you make any money? And on this show, I think sales were a little, they were down from what I was expecting. So there was a little bit of disappointment there, in which I ended up having to take a handful of stuff back that I wasn't anticipating. But sometimes there's opportunities. There's maybe a retailer that comes by that wants to buy a couple of cases that and save on the shipping, or there's some opportunities. There's always marketing folks and content creators that come by asking for demo
Sure.
copies. So that's a nice way to get those out to them, because you can
You
avoid
don't have to
having
pay
to
for
ship those
shipping.
out.
Yeah.
Right. Um, but I would say I don't think Thunderworks made a profit on the show. I don't think we are super far off. Some of that is like, so every time we have one of these shows, we're paying for everybody's hours and their hotel rooms. But one thing that Thunderworks likes to do is like take the team out to dinner, and for
That
whatever
that was the
reason,
difference between making your numbers and not, huh?
it might have been. But we went to like a very expensive place that my wife had booked, and it was a fantastic meal. But anytime you're paying for a dinner for 9 people, it's not going to be a cheap thing.
No.
Um, so that was a heavy expense.
It's the experiences.
You can't put a price on
Yeah, yeah.
that. But so that was that had an impact probably, you know, um, but and gas is a little bit more expensive than it was last year at this
Sure,
time.
sure.
These things make a difference, but I would say in general the show was a success. Like, did we make a ton of money? No, but one of the things we haven't talked about at conventions is that they're a great place to, one, make new connections with people that could definitely be great relationships down the road, and kind of reconnect with people that you haven't seen for a while. So there's always lots of manufacturers that are there. So like I have manufactured quite a few games with Panda, and I met with two of the guys from Panda while I was there, and kind of got caught up. And there's some different buyers from distributors that were there that I got to say what's up to. And there's other publishers, because as you and I like to say we're in the same bucket of like kind of coming up together in a lot of ways, where there's a lot of relationships where you build with people who are kind of going through the same things you are. So and it's like you understand their business and they understand what you're doing, and you kind of connect.
For sure,
And
for sure.
seeing these, like, friends of mine, see the friends of mine that I've met over the years again, I see them at conventions, and that's more than enough reason for me to want to go, because it's kind of, when you run your own small company, sometimes it feels like you're kind of doing it by yourself. And then having that human connection with somebody who's having success and doing similar things that you're doing, you want them to do well, they want you to do well, and you can just hang out and say what's up and kind of chat and stuff. And that's like a really fun thing, and it often will lead to opportunities in the future. some other publisher is having this problem. I've already solved that problem, so I can give them some advice, and vice
Sure.
versa. Um, so yeah, that's the part
Yeah.
that I like the most for sure.
Yeah, I think those intangibles are super valuable, right? From my perspective, for one, I got to spend 3 consecutive days with Jessica, who lives on the East Coast. So I think it's only the third time I've met her in person, right? So like for somebody I work with so much, it's really nice to be able to spend that time. I got
Yeah,
to spend time with folks that I've worked at directly. I mean, obviously you, but Steve Finn, and just generally speak people who I've worked closely with, and then also a number of other publishers I haven't seen in a while. You're talking about, you mentioned it, but also getting to engage with the fans and people who like your games. And from a product marketing, product development perspective, nothing is more powerful from like sales. Nothing is more powerful to see what is resonating with people. You know, excuse me. What's the piece of art that they gravitated towards? What do they do when they look at the back of the box? How are they reading things? What are the questions they're asking? That really is sort of super valuable on the ground learning. So like all of
yeah,
that are part of, for me, the intangibles. On the tangible side, like what I can say is, so ultimately, like net, we lost money. I mean, like just pure financials. I had we like doubled what I had estimated as the bottom, but we probably brought twice as much stuff that we needed to. Reducing the amount we brought probably wouldn't have saved that much money, but basically, I think we did. It's not. This isn't exact, but like we did like 6,000 in revenue, and the overall convention for us probably cost $7,000 or $8,000 all in between flights and hotels and U-Haul and ship and freighting and the convention and the hotel rooms for the two of them. Again, Jessica's I think was like 5 or 6 days at 200 whatever it was a night. That suddenly, we had a team plus one dinner that was about 300. So I think so when I look at it, right, and I think it's really important to recognize that that's like what am I, not net gross revenue against cost, not net profit, right? Like, so when I say we earned 6,000 in sales, that doesn't account for the cost of the goods we sold
right.
or
The
the
manufacturing
revenue
costs.
splits. Like that's probably only you know 3,500 or 4,000 profit, right? So that's even a bigger gap. But
Right.
again, we had already decided to go, so that's why my base number was like, well, at least we'll earn. I know we'll earn some money back, but I think that one of the interesting questions when we think about future years is like I do think we could optimize over the convention. We saw how people were buying, created some new bundles and sales, and actually generated some more revenue that way. I think. Delicious wasn't really like a launch at the show, but it was our new title and it sold particularly well. Um, and so I feel like it's interesting if I get next year and doing PAX again. Um, the goal would be to see if we could turn that into like, no, actually, we went to the show and we did all that, got all that intangibles and tangibly made money. I think really honing in on the products we're selling, the messaging, is a big deal. I don't know that I think I would have another year of trying to do it sort of on a shoestring, right? Like I try to like still keep those costs as low as possible and not get the bigger booth and not increase staff by 5 people, but maybe do the demo table and see if I could find a couple people locally like you did to like not have hotel costs associated with it, just paying them for their time.
Right.
I think we can do it, but then you can look at it and be like, okay, well, Gen Con next year, like that's another major consideration that Pencil First Games is making, and I know, Thunderworks is a regular, but that's like, well, that booth's more expensive, and there's more travel, and it's a longer show, so it's one thing to be 7K over 5K or 8K over 6K. It's another thing to be like 15K over 5K, right? Like, and so I think those are the things we need to consider. Though I do think the intangibles are great. I will note, because this has happened between you and me, you can get a lot of those intangibles, seeing people engaging, rubbing elbows or whatever the expressions, without having a booth, right? So like there is a certain amount of it where it's like you don't get the seeing your fans, seeing the people who love your game piece of it, which I actually think is great. But
Yeah.
the part of it where you're just like talking to people, engaging, seeing products, seeing people you haven't seen in a long time, you can do is just attending, which is like a different scale of effort and cost. So it's something, at least to consider when people are thinking about the show, right?
Yeah, I mean, there is an argument for like, hey, man, you can't make money at these shows. I don't know why you do conventions. But to me, mostly it's the intangibles. And in the past, Thunderworks has done well enough in which like we've broken even or made at least made like a couple $1,000. So like maybe like it's worth going. This show is a little bit different. Well, obviously we're kind of coming back out of COVID still. People are still getting comfortable.
Right.
Their mask mandate is very like some people love that stuff. There's some people that won't go as a result. So, and I think with the inflation that's happening in the last few months, people just aren't spending as much money as they were in the past. But, or maybe I don't have the right products that people want, but we didn't have the sales numbers that we were expecting. But in the past, we've done well. In 2019, I did 11 shows. Now I'm doing 5 or 6.
Right.
So some of these smaller shows that were even that have less of a benefit of an intangible level, and even harder to kind of make the financials make sense. So those kind of go away, and then it just turns into like, well, I could go to this little convention, or I could spend time at home with my family. So I'm going to choose that moving forward because
the old stay with and spend time with your family is a pretty good one, actually. Well, I think it's interesting. I think it's also interesting when you think of it as a 3-day marketing footprint, right? Like if you set it all aside, and there's a lot of time and energy, it really does. I mean, I remember when you were doing all those other ones, it was like you were going to convention every month or a couple of months, and it was like I couldn't believe it, like that became your life for that, amongst other things.
It makes it a lot harder to make games when you're on the road all the time.
100%. But we spend marketing dollars. I mean, different companies in different ways. But like, if you just want to get some like how to play content marketing video or something, the rate these days is going to be $1,000, couple thousand, $3,000. If you're going to do a bunch of Facebook ads and so like if your net is sort of like, well, I could spend $2,000 on marketing, I could spend $2,500 on marketing. You can, I think, compare it to the effort around a show, right? Like you could say, okay, well, I could invest that into being on site with people, connecting. It won't be as broad; it'll be more localized, but they're for sure higher value people. Not like
right.
I'm saying somebody who self-selects to go to a board game convention versus like open internet, just put an ad out. When I say higher value, like they've already passed like 17 gates of fandom to be there, right? Like versus just this person, says they like games on their Facebook page, right? Like there's just a different group.
Right.
Like, so I think thinking of it that way is another way.
Like, where do you want to spend your marketing dollars, right? So if you got this chunk of change, going to a show, at the end of the day, you might have, been a deficit of that amount of money, or I could spend that on some videos or some banner ads or some digital marketing thing, and I don't have to travel, but it's just like a different kind of flavor of marketing, I guess.
Right.
And the more I'm in this industry, the more games I work on, the more I'm well aware that like marketing is a huge piece of the success of these companies, and it's not an easy. Marketing isn't easy for sure, and there's so many questions. I mean, marketing maybe for a different call, but marketing ain't easy, that's for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Well, was there? We've talked through a lot of it. Was there anything that you thought was particularly surprising or interesting about the show?
I was impressed with the number of attendees. In my mind, it was like Gen Con and then Origins, and it was always kind of like the 1-2 punch of conventions in the U.S. But I think PAX is a solid number 2 now. And the thing that I love about the PAX show in particular is that if you consider kind of Gen Con, Origins, and PAX as kind of the 3 biggest shows in the U.S., that because Origins and Gen Con are so close to each other, not only in terms of timeline, but also in terms of physical location. The thing that's nice about PAX is that it's past at Essen. It's much more on the East Coast. I'd like to think we're hitting an audience. Sometimes the audience at Origins and Gen Con are there's a fair amount of overlap, but at PAX Unplugged, I think there's much less of that kind of overlap. So you can hit a new audience. When people walk past the booth during PAX, I mean, there's a lot of people that come to PAX because they're also kind of more into the video game world as well, even though it's an unplugged show. But just the simple questions of like, hey, are you familiar with cartographers? Like, are you familiar with role player? Like, people say no a lot more often at PAX.
Yeah, there's definitely a feeling of the audience feeling and being different than a lot of the other ones. I just was trying to find it online. It said 30,000 plus, but I don't know if that's actually the attendance number. What an Origin's probably 40 or 50, and a Gen Con's like 70. I don't know. I haven't looked at these numbers in a long time, but it doesn't feel the space. I don't know. I for sure. Anytime I've done PAX or attended those shows, it's just a very different slice of life there. And I think there's a lot of overlap, of course, but you definitely get different reactions, different perspectives from people coming to the table, which I think is great. So it does, expand opportunities and awareness. I think, it just always, it reminds you that I thought I was impressed. I actually was also impressed. Like there wasn't. Like Gen Con, as an example, is at a point where it's not like necessarily the best example, but like you have so many other vendors at Gen Con. Like there were other vendors for sure at this convention, but like I felt like it was like a pretty healthy mix where most of the stuff was gaming. I didn't feel like it was like a line of like tchotchkes.
Right, there's like less kind of stuffed animal sellers. I even think there's less of like the magic card buying booths, and there's less of the kind of like just retailers having booths. Like it felt like the vendors at PAX Unplugged, they're mainly board game publishers, and I don't know. I feel like that's the right thing.
And it was also neat. I think this is probably more of a macro trend that's true not just at PAX, but it sort of feels like the big publishers aren't stomping people out. Like it did not feel. Like, there were some bigger booths. The Everdale thing was ridiculous. There was also a pretty big Nintendo booth. But the Nintendo booth wasn't that big. Like, it just didn't feel... Like, this might have been a reflection of, like, if I had been attending conventions over the last 3 or 4 years. But it wasn't like, there's Asmodee. There's Wizards of the Coast. It didn't feel like that kind of gigantic... Like, it felt like it was... Even the mid-sized booths felt like they were relatively... small publisher, I don't know. For the example for me is like in Gen Con, like 2019, 2018, like Fantasy Flights or Asmodee's booth is like half of the show floor. It's crazy big, but then and they kind of, they're the bright shining company, and then it kind of everybody else is kind of in the shadows. Where now at this show there aren't those massive booths. There are some that are bigger than others, but it feels like a more level playing field. It doesn't feel like companies are kind of just pumping tons of money into like marketing these massive booths like they have in the past. Yeah,
so,
and that might not be specific to PAX, right? That's what that might be a general trend.
I mean, and I think that's good for the smaller publisher that doesn't have the money to pump that kind of money into a show, so they get in the spotlight a little bit more than they had in the past.
Yeah, or like Catan, like everyone. There was like I feel like there was a lot of 20 by 20s, which is really not that big when it's open. And there were just like a lot of publishers in that kind of footprint. There weren't, again, these just sort of like complete gigantic things. And the hall's it's a big hall and with wide rows, but like it doesn't necessarily feel crazy big. I found navigating it a little tough because it felt like there weren't as much, it felt like more of a grid than like rows and columns. Like I just found like I was like I'd get turned around and like where, but eventually I got there. But no, I like the show a lot. I definitely think it's likely to attend. I sort of feel like it's an interesting time of year too, in that it's heading into the holidays. There was a lot of people talking about presents when they were buying stuff.
Right.
and but it wasn't like on top of Thanksgiving, and it didn't feel like as sort of like first week of December seems like a decent time to do your like presumably this is most people's last convention of the year, and that kind of thing. So I don't want to lose this recording because it's gone too long. My computer's like, I can't handle this. So let's cut it there.
Okay.
Thanks so much for chatting, and it was great seeing you, man.
Always a good time.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
All right, watching. Guys. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Hey, everybody. Edo here, and thanks for watching Gaming with Edo. Reviews over here on this playlist, League and Insider videos over here on this one. Subscribe, share, all that good stuff. But most importantly, play some great games. Thanks.